people understand that there's an answer, there's a way. We the people have to say. So send the orders to prepare, that we the people do declare. Send the good news, send the word.
No human being is illegal. We need to remember that. Maybe there's some problems with people being undocumented, but we subconsciously seem to apply illegality to living human beings. And if so, what shall we do? Welcome to DN News in Review. My name is Lou Ismay. Some things in the news about which we should know. SIM cards. Those little gadgets in our telephones and in other kinds of electronic equipment, but especially the cell phones. There's a key to each one to assure that there's privacy and no confusions. Now we learn, and discussed on Democracy Now!, that NASA, our National Security Agency, and the equivalent in the UK, GC headquarters, have stolen or hacked, however we want to call it, the encryption keys to billions of cell phones worldwide. Hacked a company, a Dutch company, Gemalto, or Gemalto, manufacturer of these cards. So now at least two government agencies, one in the UK and one in the US, now without any restrictions, know more about us than we would want them to know. It's called privacy. True, privacy is a rare commodity these days, but what shall we do? At least we know. And across the world, there are people who are beginning to work together. Will people form solid international relationships and begin to redesign, if that's what needs to be done, our systems of government and our systems of doing business with one another. We also learned something that was discussed on Democracy Now! It's called Fear Incorporated. Now, let's take a look at the headline on this article. But just take a moment. Here, we'll do it this way. This was on Monday the 16th. Fear Inc. As anti-Muslim incidents continue, a report exposes funders and pundits of Islamophobia. In other words, there are people in the United States of America, foundations, organizations, and corporations and individuals that pool money to create hate toward Muslims in our own country, creating hate. The money is distributed to tight-knit organizations that pass on the information, and what's created now is sort of an echo chamber, if we want to use that term, of hate. against an important minority religious group in our country. There are only a few million Muslims. Their faith is one of peace. Some radical people use their God as an excuse or rationale for conducting whatever horrible situations they use in order to create fear in their countries, in their parts of the world. But it's an old religion. But to foment hate and have people die as a result, is that the American way? Some people may consider it to be okay, but what about the rest of us? Imagine hate. Bad enough that we have racism. It's worse that we have Islamophobia. We have to think, what has the world become? Was it always like this? Do we have blinders on? Don't see things coming? Whatever it is, are we paying attention? And is there something we should be doing about this? Through laws, whatever it is? Think about that. Approximately 50 years ago, a man who spoke his mind caused fear amongst others, but is considered one of the most important people of the 20th century. He was killed about 50 years ago, February 21st or whatever it is, 1964 or so. He was about to speak at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. Malcolm X. Malcolm X. Martin Luther King Jr. Other people who were interested in what was happening to the Afro-American community. Why was there still racism, wanting to bring about some changes? Martin Luther King Jr. had one approach. Malcolm X had another approach. Both of them important concepts. He was killed, assassinated, both men. Not the same year, but both men assassinated. Possibly for exactly the same reason. Possibly because they spoke of justice, not just in this country, but elsewhere in the world. Both men, and Malcolm X was first, to find fault with the war in Vietnam, realizing the implications of the war and the destruction and the reasons for the war. Martin Luther King spoke up at the Riverside Church in Manhattan, New York City, calling attention to the war and what it was doing to our country, to our people, and to those who are subjected to our warfare. Looking ahead, what do you and I do about ending the racism? We're finding out more about the past because we have some anniversaries that have come up recently. And there's another one regarding an unsolved murder, an unsolved lynching. It happened in what is known as the Moores Ford You know what a ford is? It's a little low spot or a high spot in the river bottom, so that just a little bit of water trickles over. And a ford is a place where you can walk across, get your feet wet, or drive across in a vehicle, or ride across horseback. So Moore's Ford, and there was a bridge at that spot. And on that bridge, there were 4 people, 2 couples, who were killed. Now, 60 shots, according to the coroners, were fired into these 4 people. One of them was an Army veteran, just back from World War II. This was in 1946 when the incident happened. He was killed. So was his wife. Another couple were killed. Man was just released from jail on bail, a trial for allegedly killing a white person. His wife was pregnant. And the horror of it all included the fact, and this was discussed on the radio and the television, wherever democracy now is available, the horror of it. The infant was cut out of the mother and disposed of separately, using that word, but that's what happened. Just now, there's an ongoing investigation because it's been realized, and the FBI is looking into it, has been for quite a while apparently. There are still people alive who were participants in that incident or who knew about the incident, and they're being sought to bring justice, whatever it's going to be, so that we know about the past. We know what we're capable of doing in terms of good, in terms of evil. How will it affect our nation? And how do we pass these things on to the younger generations so that they understand what's the chain of information, what's important to know. We have so many crises. We have civil rights crises. We have monetary crises. We have environmental crises. What should we know? What do we want to do to change things if that's what we think is the important thing, the best thing to do? Are we listening to ourselves? Are we listening to others? Are we tuning in or tuning out? Something to consider. Well, other kinds of things. In Argentina, 400 people have marched in protest. There was a prosecutor who was Alberto Nissan, prosecuting a case. He had allegations regarding the president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. Her involvement in the case is a situation in which Iran was involved in blowing up a synagogue in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. There was a deal somewhere in the background to protect Iran in terms of oil, whatever the details are. Was there corruption? 400,000 people marching for justice, for information. It's kind of interesting in a sense. This synagogue was damaged in 1994. In 2014, 400,000 people marched in New York City regarding climate and environment and the planet. Just the fact that the numbers of 400,000 is a coincidence maybe, but at least it's an indication of the seriousness that people have taken this issue in Argentina, and clearly an indication of the seriousness of the climate march in New York City in September of 2014. Now, we've had some extreme cold. We're living with it. And during this period of cold, we've had several fossil fuel mishaps or accidents. ExxonMobil in LA blowing up a plant. Oil workers on the West Coast on strike. Train disaster, what's called the bomb train blowing up in West Virginia. Evacuation of 1,000 or so people into communities, whatever. Another tragedy, a train wreck in Ontario, Canada. We are aware. Are we aware of the dangers of transporting some of this fossil fuel material? Are we ever going to have a fossil-free economy? Just generating electricity, just the generation of electricity, puts into the atmosphere far more greenhouse gases than through transportation. We blame the automobile and the trucks and so forth, but we're also creating a greenhouse gas for the generation of electricity. Electricity can be generated by sunshine, the light from the sun. Solar panels, photovoltaic panels on homes, in farmyards, in pastures, wherever sunlight can be helpful in generating electricity, it's being done. There are ways, there are even still in New York State, federal and state subsidies for the installation of solar panels on homes and on businesses. Still time, locally, if anybody wants to take care of it, take advantage of it. Well, another educational institution, the new school in New York City, Board of Trustees has voted to divest its portfolio from the fossil fuel industry. The idea is spreading. We just need to be aware of it, don't we? Encourage, maybe? Whatever. But it is happening. Now, the president's plan to keep undocumented migrants from being deported and to help others has been stymied temporarily by the verdict of a judge in Texas. The White House has decided to let the courts decide. We'll get some news whenever that decision is made. Texas, 25 or 30 other states have brought a lawsuit. We have to think a little bit about things. 25, 30 states. Immigration. 25 or 30 states. Ideas submitted to the legislatures regarding Islamophobia. Laws proposed regarding Sharia law. We've had other ideas circulated in these approximately 30 states on a number of issues. Is it a coincidence? Are we aware? Could it be that ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, once secret, now well known, could that organization be behind some of the things that have been happening or been proposed, stirring up things in our country for the good or evil? Whatever the intentions, do we ever consider connecting the dots? The possible interrelationship of what's going on. Greece is still trying to get its austerity restrictions removed. There's a great interest in the new party, the left party in Greece, and in the near vicinity in Spain is also interested in a new party. People wanting to have a say, want to be part of this decision-making process. Now, Angela Davis gave a talk recently on public radio in Albany, MAC, Albany Medical Center station. And she was speaking on the alternative radio program. It's on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock from 1 to 2 o'clock. Very interesting program. And she spoke about this idea of people around the world becoming connected, sort of an international movement. And when we think of Greece, we think of the Ukraine, and we think of Spain, and all around the world, and what's going on in the States. Is it possible that people want the same general opportunities for freedom, for economic growth, for education? Be interesting to keep track. And if people decided to work together on the climate change issues, wouldn't that be interesting? Now we got some other things to talk about. We've lost a little bit of track of time wandering about, but let's look at some other things. American Friends Service Committee, known as the Quakers, put out an annual publication. Can we read it? It's a little difficult to read. Well, I'll read it. Something that Ike said years ago. Every gun that is made, every warship that is launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, who are cold and are not clothed. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Oh, remember who Ike was. He was the commanding officer, 5-star general, European Theater of Operations, World War II. Something more to read. Reducing the military budget is the best legacy we can leave for coming generations. And the movement that the Quakers are creating, 1 minute for peace. Now, let's look at some facts here. The military, Department of Defense, war, nuclear weapons, 55% of the federal budget for those things. For education, 6.2%. For veterans benefits, 5.6%. For government operations, 5.5%. For health, 4.9%. For labor, 4.8%. For international affairs, 3.3%. For energy and environment, 3%. For science, 2.5%. For transportation, 2.3%. And for food and agriculture, 1%. 55% for the military, 1% for food and agriculture, 55% for the military, 6.2% for education. Now, this whole idea of this movement is 1% for peace, and so the organization wants to raise. Here it is. American Friends Service Committee seeks to raise the equivalent of 1 minute of what the military spent in 1 year. $1.2 million per minute is what is spent on our military. $1.2 million is 1 minute, and American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, want to raise that amount of money for a peace campaign. Just calling that to our attention. 55%. People cold, hungry, being exploited. Had we thought about these things? Now, this is the current issue of Solidarity Notes. It's a March issue. And we just call attention to two things. First, something that Thomas Jefferson said. He wrote, "I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which dare already to challenge our government to a trial of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country, the letter he wrote to George Logan in 1816. The article in this issue that's of particular interest is an article by Tom Ellis, Restore the Power of Labor. When labor had the power to better the lives of the workers, the result was bettering the lives of all workers, whether they were members of a union or not. Everybody who had to earn a living benefited by whatever the labor people were interested in: education, safety, health, the living wage, all the things that you and I need to exist in our kind of democracy. And the idea spread around the world. There has been a movement since Mr. Reagan was president to eliminate labor unions when it can be done, to dull the idea of people fighting for rights and justice. Well, the article is worth reading. The Solidarity Committee operates out of the center in Central Avenue. It's a social justice center. So you can just call in or write in and get put on the mailing list. A very important monthly newsletter, what's going on around the area, including the fact that the people at the Times Union need to get a contract resolved. People who are without any kind of organized help. School crossing guards, whatever the situation is, are included in the newsletter to help us become aware of an important segment of our communities. Labor unions, teacher labor unions, railroad worker unions, whatever important support and backing. Oh, there are a couple events before we forget it. There's one event coming up at the 8th step. It's coming up in a few days. Here it is. It's 28th Saturday, 7:30. Kate Campbell. This is in the underground part of Proctor's. It's coming up then. And looking ahead, just looking ahead, there's an important event coming up in the Old Songs in Voorheesville. It's in March. You want to put it on your calendar. It's Friday the 13th. Beppe Grumbetter and Mr. Eggleston. 8 p.m. Voorheesville. Just across the side street from Stewart's shop in Voorheesville. Yes Magazine. Current issue. There's a major story. We'll come back to it another day, but from the tiny Amazon tribe that's beating big oil to the guy who built a farm in his swimming pool. The issue is devoted together with Earth. And we're going to take a look at the chap with the swimming pool. Here he is. His name is Dennis McChung. That's the swimming pool in the back. He's turned it into a greenhouse. He's turned his lot, house, backyard into a productive farm. He has goats. He has food. He raises sugarcane. He raises bananas. His farm is in Mesa, Arizona. So the climate is suitable for the sugarcane and the bananas. So he has eggs. He has milk. He has cheese, all from his little farm. Another concept in the same issue of Yes magazine has to do with a man named David Korten. His new story is to replace the gospel of money. Now, we've all been raised with the idea that money is the most important thing in the world. We work for the money. We use the money to buy things that we need, and sometimes to buy things that we like, that we want. He wrote a book several years ago, When Corporations Rule the World. He became famous and he speaks. But let's look at the concept, replacing the gospel of money. The less I'm dependent on money, the freer I am. Realize that the only legitimate purpose of the economy, is to serve life, serve us as living beings, making our living in co-productive partnership with living Earth. The partnership, living Earth. Now, here, let's see if we can get a little bit closer on this. This sort of brings a lot of his ideas together. He's being interviewed by one of the editors of Yes magazine, and the question was, like George Bailey's Building and Loan in It's a Wonderful Life. Remember that film? Anyway, Korten, exactly. If more of our money circulated in our communities rather than the Wall Street casino, it would facilitate people organizing locally to meet more of their economic needs with local resources. Control of money is the ultimate mechanism of social control in a society. Control of money is the ultimate mechanism of social control in a society in which most every person depends on money for the basic means of living: food, water, shelter, heat, transportation, entertainment. This leads us to the voluntary simplicity movement. The less I am dependent on money, the freer I am. Realize that the only legitimate purpose of the economy is to serve life, is to serve us as living beings, making our living in a co-productive partnership with living Earth. Now, David Korten is important, and it's important to a group of people that meet at the Moon and River Cafe in the Stockade area of Schenectady on the first Wednesday evening every month. And Korten's ideas are central to some of the discussions. What are we doing? What should we be thinking about? How will we bring about any changes that we want to bring? What's good for people and what's good for the planet? Sometimes we really don't think that we're being exploited. But really, many of us are being exploited. We don't realize that the way we treat planet Earth, we're exploiting it. Taking its resources, they're called natural resources. The way that we use them, or some of us use them, we are depleting, exploiting, discarding when it's no longer useful. And interestingly, we have something called human resources, which is an idea that's been around for 30, 40 years or whatever. It started basically sometime during the Reagan administration. So the question, the big question, are the human resources being exploited? Are the natural resources being exploited? Are the human resources abandoned? Are the natural resources being abandoned because they're used up? People being used up, discarded? Land being used up, discarded? Is there a connection of dots? Is there some commonality to this whole thing? Are we considering that? Do we care? But the ideas of David Korten may be worth considering. His new book is going to be out soon. Look for it in your independent bookstores, in your libraries, and decide for yourself, is there something there worth considering? And by the way, Korten is not the only one talking about changing our economic system. If you read widely, you'll find it mentioned in a number of situations where somebody is thinking about the results that with which we are all living and what the future might bring. Now, we want to go back to something that we spoke about recently, and it's in this issue of Rolling Stone, which is still on the newsstands. This issue had to do with Saturday Night Live. But the main issue had to do with the Pentagon and climate change. And it's important just to refresh our memories. The Pentagon has known about climate change for several decades. And there's clear understanding that climate change does affect our way of life and does affect the security of the United States of America and other countries. And that the resources of what's happening in terms of floods and droughts and so forth around the world could very easily bring about great disruptions, people moving elsewhere, migrating, panic because they don't have the resources that they need. Now, there's no question that the Arctic ice is melting. The ice shelves in Antarctica are melting, and so are the glaciers. There's no question that when water is warm, it occupies more space. That's nature. Can't do anything about that. So the oceans are warming, the waters are rising, and the example in this particular article, let's take a look at some photos here. The U.S. Navy could be in this condition. We depend on the Navy. It was our first major investment the U.S. Navy, protecting the trade routes. Now, in Norfolk, Virginia, we have a situation. It's one of the largest, it may be the largest naval base that we have. Those carriers are parts of various carrier groups supported by other vessels that are deployed around the world to help us, protect us. And that's a pretty flat naval base there. And what happens periodically is that in big storms, there are floods. When there are floods, no one moves very rapidly from their homes or their barracks to the waterfront to man the ships. And floods are causing problems in other parts of the world. And because the ice lanes, the ice in the Arctic is melting, there's less ice and more open water. And now shipping is going to be easier to go from one hemisphere across the northern hemisphere from one part of the world to another. And Russia is one of the countries. Here is a flag that was planted in the ocean bottom 14,000 feet down. Was it 14,000 feet? Well, whatever it was, grappled down to get that. Yeah. So, but the important thing, in other parts of the world, there are hot spots. In other parts of the world, there's less water. In other parts of the world, there's less food. In other parts of the world, it's going to be too much water. It's going to wipe out whole communities in Bangladesh. This is the Philippines. This is a situation that we may no longer be able to control at some point. The area around China, where there's free trade, will there be? So in every continent, our own, down here in Mexico, there's a situation developing which will affect the states in this part of the country and elsewhere in the country. So we may be freezing. It may be cold, snowy, windy, but elsewhere it's not. And elsewhere in the world, we had earlier this year the second warmest January on record worldwide. February, we have a record cold. It may turn out to be the second coldest February. The predictions are that just we'll have maybe 7-8 degree increase in temperature within a couple decades. When some people think it's cold, and you'll hear it if you listen, well, it's real cold, so that takes care of the idea of warming. What happened to global warming? They don't think that's right. They don't think that's factual. They don't think that's possible. But we need to consider, and would you agree? Temperatures change in short notice. Weather changes, but the long haul is really what we need to consider. Oh, there's a little article here in the current issue of National Geographic. It's kind of nice, fun to know about. Not everybody will be interested, but let's just look at it. This has to do with pure Hawaiian. And we'll take a look at a part of Hawaii that's world famous. It's the surfboarding. Now, here's something interesting. Surfboards is an old Hawaiian tradition. And so is tattooing. Here's his body tattooing. Just one man, an iron worker, living on the west coast of Oahu. Marvelous tattooing. Here, the chain of islands. This is Niihau, which is only for native Hawaiians. And this is the island chain. These are the beaches. This is Oahu. This is oh, can we get a little bit closer on this? This is Makaha Beach, where surfboarding is. This is Honolulu here. This is Molokai with the beaches. Lanai, Maui, and the big island of Hawaii. These are the surfing beaches. And one of the interesting things is that Makaha on the west coast of Oahu became a laboratory for new surfing techniques and board designs over the hundreds of years. And the surfboard design is may interest some of us. We think of surfing, but we don't really think too much about the science of surfing. Here we go. Riding the waves. Surfboards, with the small ones, at one time were 10 pounds. Now the body boards are 5. There were longer boards. There was the Alaha boards were 40 pounds. Now they're about 15. Oh no, that's it, 6. Sorry. And the long boards here were once 150 pounds, and now they're much smaller. So the long boards, these were once reserved only for chiefs. These are the middle boards, and these are the body boards. And then there's an illustration, and you can look it up in the National Geographic yourself. The techniques of riding the boards and how far people can travel. Some people can get about 400 yards out of a good glide. And this is the other one that we wanted to show you. It's the current issue of Mother Jones News. And the story to call attention to is this one. It has to do with eating fast foods. There's a man at Cornell University who is a food psychologist. His name is Brian Wansink. And he believes in letting them eat junk if they want. But he's clever. He's done some research. He found that people who eat at a table in the front of the restaurant have 80% better chance, according to his statistics, his research, of eating salads. People who sit in the back of the restaurant, sort of half out of sight, are more likely to buy desserts than the people who sit in the front near the windows. But here it is. Willpower, not a strong suit, no problem, says council food psychologist Brian Wansink. His research suggests that by making a few simple tweaks to your surroundings, you can trick yourself into cutting calories. And that's what he's been doing. He's letting the food industry know about this. Shove the breakfast cereal in the kitchen cabinet. In Wansink's studies, people who kept their cereal visible, even the healthy hippie stuff, weighed 21 pounds more on average than those who kept it out of sight just for the breakfast cereal. Serve yourself from the stovetop rather than family style on the table. People who ate from the stovetop also ate 19% less. Pick red wine instead of white. Subjects who did so poured 9% less. Drink it from a tall, thin glass instead of a short, fat one, 12% less. And set the glass on a table when you pour rather than holding it in your hands, 12% less. Make sure the color of your food contrasts with your plate. When they matched, Wansink found people consumed 22% more food. All restaurants request a table near the front door. People sitting far from the entrance were 73% more likely to order dessert. Interesting. If the restaurant offers top bar tables, high tables, snag one. Wansink predicts you'll be less likely to order fried foods. Want your kid to choose apple slices instead of fries at McDonald's? Ask her, what would Batman choose? Well, suddenly we're out of time. Well, there's more to this. It's worthwhile maybe repeating this column another time. Thank you for being with us. Thank Glenn Jarrett for his engineering. I've been your host, Lou Ismay. Hope to be together the next time. In the meantime, pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on. Pay attention to how you feel about things. Let people know if you're dissatisfied.
We the people hand in hand. We the people understand that there's an answer, there's a way. We the people have to say. So send the orders to prepare that we